The final curtain call for Hollywood's brightest stars wasn't always a traditional cemetery plot with a marble headstone. While millions of fans mourned their silver screen idols, few realized that some of cinema's most legendary figures ended up in final resting places so unusual, so unexpected, that they defy everything we assume about celebrity afterlives. These aren't just graves, they're the last plot twists in lives already filled with drama. What if I told you that one of America's most beloved comedians was buried in a secret location for decades because his body was stolen for ransom, or that a glamorous leading lady's ashes were scattered across a Swedish fjord only for locals to create an unauthorized memorial that attracts pilgrims from across the globe? Today, we're exploring the astonishing, sometimes unsettling tales of where Hollywood's golden age icons truly ended up, stories far stranger than any script they ever performed. 1. Charlie Chaplin, the star whose body was stolen. The Little Tramp's final act became one of the strangest chapters in Hollywood history. After his peaceful death in Switzerland on Christmas Day 1977, Chaplin was laid to rest in the quiet Gossier-sur-Vevey cemetery near his final home. But his eternal peace would be dramatically disturbed just 3 months later in a crime that shocked the world. On March 2, 1978, cemetery workers arrived to discover something horrifying. Chaplin's grave had been desecrated, his oak coffin completely missing. Police were baffled, as the gravesite showed no significant signs of disturbance despite the considerable weight of the coffin. The precision suggested professionals, rather than vandals, were responsible. The mystery deepened when Chaplin's widow, Una, began receiving bizarre phone calls demanding $600,000, approximately $2.5 million today, for the return of her husband's remains. The caller provided photographic evidence that they indeed possessed Chaplin's body and threatened further desecration if payment wasn't made. Rather than quietly paying the ransom, Una worked with Swiss police to set a trap. Authorities tapped the Chaplin home phones and monitored 200 public phone booths throughout the region. For weeks, the investigation seemed to yield nothing as the family endured the psychological torment of knowing Charlie's body remained in criminal hands. The breakthrough came when police traced calls to a mechanic named Roman Wardus and his accomplice, Gancho Ganev, both struggling Polish immigrants. Their scheme unraveled when they attempted to collect the ransom. Swiss police arrested both men, who finally revealed where they had hidden the coffin, buried in a cornfield about 10 miles from the Chaplin estate. On May 17, 1978, nearly 3 months after the theft, Chaplin was reburied in his original grave, but this time with reinforced concrete surrounding the coffin to prevent any future disturbances. The bizarre episode added a final, unexpected chapter to Chaplin's already extraordinary life story. What makes this particularly strange is that Wardus later explained his motivation wasn't just financial desperation. He had genuinely believed Chaplin's family was extraordinarily wealthy and would easily afford what he considered a reasonable price for their loved one's remains. The court didn't agree with his assessment, sentencing him to 4 years hard labor, while his accomplice received an 18-month suspended sentence. Today, visitors to Chaplin's grave find a simple marker in the small Swiss cemetery, with no indication of the extraordinary events that once made this peaceful plot the center of international attention. The concrete reinforcement beneath the soil, however, stands as a silent testament to perhaps the strangest posthumous experience of any Golden Age star. 2. Marlene Dietrich, The Divided Grave. The sultry German-American icon's final resting place reflects the complex dualities that defined her life. Caught between 2 countries, 2 identities, and ultimately 2 burial sites that tell a fascinating story of belonging and rejection. Dietrich's death in Paris in 1992 created an immediate controversy about where her remains should rest. Though she had become an American citizen in 1939, had served the Allied cause during World War II, and had explicitly rejected her German homeland during Hitler's regime, Dietrich's relationship with her birthplace remained complicated throughout her life. After careful consideration, Dietrich's daughter decided to honor what she claimed were her mother's wishes by arranging burial in Berlin, the city of her birth, despite Dietrich having vowed never to return to Germany. On May 16, 1992, her body was flown to Berlin for a funeral attended by German dignitaries and international celebrities. What makes Dietrich's burial truly unusual, however, is its precise location. Rather than being interred in a prestigious central cemetery, as might befit a star of her magnitude, Dietrich's grave lies in the small, relatively obscure Städtischer Friedhof, the third cemetery in Berlin-Schöneberg. The modest location was chosen partly because 3 generations of her family were buried there, but also because authorities feared a more prominent location might attract neo-Nazis vandalism due to Dietrich's outspoken anti-Nazi stance. The strangeness doesn't end there. While Dietrich's physical remains rest in Berlin, significant portions of her estate, including her iconic costumes, films, photographs, and personal effects, were explicitly bequeathed to the Film Museum in Berlin. However, Dietrich's will included a striking provision. These items could only be displayed in Berlin after German reunification, reflecting her complex relationship with her homeland. Perhaps strangest of all is what happened in Paris, where Dietrich had lived her final reclusive years. Though her body was transported to Berlin, many Parisians considered her one of their own. This led to the creation of an unofficial memorial site at her former apartment building at 12 Avenue Montaigne, where admirers still leave flowers, notes, and small tokens, essentially creating a second spiritual grave that exists in parallel with her official Berlin resting place. This duality, a physical grave in a country she rejected and an unofficial memorial in a city she adopted, perfectly captures Dietrich's complex identity as a woman who transcended national boundaries while never fully belonging anywhere. As she famously said, "I am not a German woman, I am an international artist who happens to have been born in Germany." Today, visitors to Dietrich's actual grave find a simple marker bearing only her name, birth, and death dates, and a German inscription that translates to, "Here I stand on the marker of my days," a line from her favorite poem. The simplicity belies the extraordinary complexity of her posthumous journey and divided legacy. 3. John Barrymore, The Borrowed Grave. The legendary actor known as the Great Profile experienced perhaps the most bizarre posthumous journey of any Hollywood star, one involving drinking buddies, a morgue heist, and a macabre practical joke that would sound too outlandish even for fiction. Barrymore's death from cirrhosis and other complications in May 1942 marked the end of a tumultuous life filled with theatrical triumph and personal excess. His body was prepared for a dignified funeral at Pierce Brothers Mortuary in Los Angeles, with plans for burial in the family plot at Philadelphia's Calvary Cemetery, alongside his parents and grandparents. What happened next has become Hollywood legend, though separating fact from embellishment remains challenging. According to long-standing accounts, Barrymore's friends, reportedly including fellow actors Errol Flynn, W.C. Fields, and director Raoul Walsh, conspired to borrow his body before burial for one final prank. Walsh allegedly bribed morgue attendants to release Barrymore's body for a few hours, then transported it to Flynn's home. There, they supposedly propped the deceased actor in a chair during a poker game, raised drinks in his honor, and took photographs, giving their friend a final night of revelry before his burial. While this extraordinary story has been disputed, with some dismissing it as Hollywood myth-making, enough witnesses maintained its truth over decades that the incident has become inseparable from Barrymore's legacy. Flynn's autobiography makes reference to an incident involving Barrymore's corpse, though with significantly fewer details than later retellings would include. The strangeness continued after Barrymore's actual funeral. Though initially buried in the family plot in Philadelphia as planned, his son, John Drew Barrymore, later had his father's remains moved to Mount Vernon Cemetery in Philadelphia in 1980, believing this location better suited the actor's status. This second burial site features a more elaborate monument befitting Hollywood royalty. Perhaps most unusual is that for years after his death, rumors persisted that Barrymore wasn't in either grave, that his body had actually been cremated after the morgue incident, with the casket containing only symbolic remains. These rumors were finally put to rest when documentation confirmed his intact burial. The legacy of Barrymore's strange posthumous journey continues influencing popular culture. The incident inspired scenes in the film S.O.B., directed by Blake Edwards, and the story is still recounted as the quintessential example of Hollywood's macabre sense of humor during the studio era. Today, visitors to Barrymore's actual grave in Mount Vernon Cemetery find a dignified monument that gives no hint of his body's alleged adventures between death and burial. The inscription reads simply, "Good night, sweet prince," the famous line from Hamlet that seems particularly fitting given the strange journey his remains reportedly took before finally resting in peace. 4. Bela Lugosi, buried in his Dracula cape. The man who defined Count Dracula for generations took his most famous role with him to eternity in one of Hollywood's most thematically appropriate burials. Lugosi's final resting arrangement reflects both his inescapable identification with the vampire count and the tragic typecasting that ultimately limited his career. Lugosi's death from a heart attack in August 1956 came after years of career decline, addiction struggles, and financial difficulty, a far cry from the stardom he had achieved with 1931's Dracula. His family had limited funds for funeral arrangements, but they understood one thing clearly. Despite Lugosi's lifelong frustration at being typecast, the Dracula role remained his defining legacy. In what became one of Hollywood's most symbolic burial decisions, Lugosi was laid to rest wearing one of the original Dracula capes from the Universal Pictures production. Though often reported that this was Lugosi's request, family members later clarified that it was actually their decision, believing he would have appreciated the gesture connecting him eternally with the role that made him immortal in cinema history. What makes this particularly unusual is that authentic Dracula capes from the original production were valuable Hollywood artifacts even in 1956. Using one for burial effectively removed a significant piece of film history from existence. Some film historians have suggested the cape used was actually a later replica, but Lugosi's son and biographers maintain it was authentic, a genuinely valuable costume committed to the grave with its wearer. The strangeness extends to Lugosi's burial location. Rather than being interred in a prestigious cemetery like many Hollywood stars, Lugosi was laid to rest in the Holy Cross Cemetery in Culver City, a Catholic burial ground that seems ironically incongruous for the man most associated with the unholy vampire Count. His modest grave bore only a simple marker for many years, until fans raised funds for a more substantial monument in the 1970s. Perhaps most unusual was the funeral itself. Despite Lugosi's fame, few Hollywood figures attended his service, reflecting how thoroughly the industry had abandoned him in his later years. However, hundreds of ordinary fans appeared, many wearing vampire capes in tribute, creating the surreal image of a sea of Draculas bidding farewell to the original. The symbolism of Lugosi taking his Dracula cape to the grave has resonated through decades of pop culture. Director Tim Burton paid homage to this in his film Ed Wood, which depicts Lugosi, played by Martin Landau, being buried in his cape. The image of the actor eternally dressed as the character he couldn't escape in life creates a poignant metaphor for the double-edged nature of iconic roles. Today, visitors to Lugosi's grave in Holy Cross Cemetery find a black granite monument featuring his likeness and the inscription, "Beloved Father, Bela Lugosi, 1882 to 1956. Though the cape remains invisibly present beneath the earth, the association between actor and character continues drawing vampire enthusiasts to pay their respects at what has become an unofficial shrine to horror film history. 5. Jayne Mansfield, The Heart-Shaped Gravestone. The blonde bombshell's tragic death at age 34 in a horrific 1967 car accident led to one of Hollywood's most distinctive and unusual memorial sites, a heart-shaped monument that reflects both her sex symbol image and the extraordinary cult of personality that continues surrounding her memory. Mansfield's burial arrangements were immediately complicated by sensationalized and often inaccurate reporting about her accident. Contrary to persistent urban legends, she was not decapitated in the crash, though her injuries were catastrophic. After autopsy, her body was prepared for burial at Fairview Cemetery in Penargyle, Pennsylvania, her childhood hometown rather than Hollywood. What makes Mansfield's grave truly unusual is its design, a large, pink-hued heart-shaped monument that perfectly captures her carefully constructed public image. The stone features her likeness, her birth name, Vera Jane Palmer, and an inscription reading, "We live to love you more each day," words that seem to speak directly to the dedicated fans who continue visiting decades after her death. The strangeness doesn't end with the monument's shape. For years after her burial, unexplained phenomena were reported around her grave. Visitors claimed to smell her signature perfume near the monument, even during winter months when no flowers were present. Others reported hearing whispers or seeing brief apparitions of a blonde woman near the site, leading to Mansfield's grave becoming a regular stop on paranormal investigation circuits. Perhaps most unusual is what happened to Mansfield's legacy in Hollywood itself. Despite having no physical memorial in Los Angeles, the site of her fatal accident on US 90 in Louisiana became an unofficial shrine. For decades, fans would leave flowers, photographs, and personal notes at the roadside location, eventually prompting local authorities to install a small marker, acknowledging the site's significance to her admirers. The peculiarity extends to the conspiracy theories that emerged after her burial. Some fans became convinced that Mansfield's actual remains were secretly interred in Hollywood rather than Pennsylvania, creating a persistent belief that her Penargyle grave contains only symbolic remains. These theories, though thoroughly debunked by family members and funeral directors, continue circulating among devoted fans. Adding to the strangeness is the contrast between Mansfield's sex symbol image and her burial in a traditional small-town cemetery in the conservative community where she spent her early years. The heart-shaped pink monument stands out dramatically among the conventional gravestones surrounding it, creating a visual representation of how Mansfield herself always stood apart from conventional expectations. Today, visitors to Mansfield's grave find that her memorial has become an unofficial pilgrimage site for fans of old Hollywood glamour. Many leave lipstick kisses on the stone, or small gifts, like pink feathers and heart-shaped trinkets, continuing a tradition of adoration that has outlived her by decades. The heart-shaped monument has become so iconic that it has been replicated in miniature as collector's items for devoted fans. 6. Steve McQueen, the Ocean View Ranch. The King of Cool chose an extraordinarily isolated and breathtaking final resting place that perfectly captures his independent spirit and lifelong desire to escape Hollywood's constraints. McQueen's burial location remains one of the most difficult celebrity graves to access, requiring a genuine pilgrimage for fans seeking to pay respects. After his death from mesothelioma complications in November 1980, McQueen's body was cremated the following day. What happened next defied Hollywood convention. Rather than being interred in a prestigious cemetery alongside other film legends, McQueen's ashes were taken to a remote location that few would ever have associated with the sophisticated screen star. His remains were scattered at sea off the coast of Santa Paula, California, but not from a conventional boat or shoreline location. Instead, McQueen's ashes were carried aloft in a vintage World War II-era Stearman biplane piloted by his friend Sammy Mason, who had taught McQueen advanced flying techniques. As the aircraft soared over the Pacific, McQueen's remains were released into the wind, merging with the ocean he had loved. What makes this particularly unusual is that no specific marker or monument was erected at the time. McQueen explicitly wanted to avoid creating a tourist attraction or shrine. However, fans eventually established an unofficial memorial site at the hangar, where McQueen had kept his vintage aircraft collection, leaving photographs, model cars, and other mementos in tribute. The strangeness extends to what happened years after his death. In 2012, a group of aviation enthusiasts and McQueen fans raised funds to create a small, tasteful monument near the airfield where his ashes were last on land. Unlike traditional celebrity memorials, this marker doesn't contain any remains. It simply acknowledges the location's significance in McQueen's final journey. The monument's inscription reads simply, "Steve McQueen, 1930 to 1980, the spirit lives on." Perhaps most unusual is the contrast between McQueen's final resting place and the locations initially proposed by the studio system. According to individuals close to the actor, Hollywood executives had suggested burial at Forest Lawn or another prestigious cemetery where his grave could become a tourist attraction like those of other film legends. McQueen explicitly rejected this idea, preferring to disappear into the elements he had loved, the open sky and the limitless ocean. The legacy of McQueen's unusual burial choice extends to his influence on other celebrities. His decision to avoid creating a conventional gravesite reportedly inspired several other actors to choose similar arrangements, preferring natural settings over memorial parks. Paul Newman, another actor-racer with similar independent tendencies, later chose a comparable ash-scattering arrangement. Today, true McQueen devotees sometimes charter flights from the Santa Paula airport, following approximately the same route his ashes took on their final journey. Unlike conventional grave visitors who can leave flowers or mementos, these aerial pilgrims can only offer a moment of silent appreciation while passing through the same patch of sky, perhaps the most fitting tribute to an actor who always valued freedom above all else. 7. Jean Harlow, The Sealed Crypt. The original blonde bombshell met a tragic early death at age 26, but the circumstances of her burial proved almost as dramatic as her meteoric career. Harlow's final resting place reflects both the extraordinary grief of her mother and the strange posthumous journey of one of Hollywood's brightest stars. After Harlow's shocking death from kidney failure in June 1937, her mother, Jean Bello, known as Mama Jean, made an unprecedented decision that would affect how her daughter would be remembered. Rather than selecting a traditional burial, she purchased an elaborate private room, not just a plot, in the Great Mausoleum at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, California. What makes Harlow's entombment particularly unusual is that her mother insisted on an extraordinarily expensive triple-sealed bronze casket, reportedly costing $5,000 in 1937, approximately $95,000 today. This extravagant vessel was then placed within a solid marble sarcophagus inside the private room, essentially creating 3 layers of separation between Harlow and the outside world. The strangeness doesn't end there. Mama Jean insisted that the room remain perpetually filled with fresh flowers, establishing a trust fund specifically for this purpose. For decades after Harlow's death, staff at Forest Lawn maintained this unusual arrangement, regularly replacing floral arrangements in the sealed room that no visitors could enter. Perhaps most bizarre was Mama Jean's decision regarding the room's accessibility. She established strict rules that no one, not even family members, could enter the sealed chamber after the initial entombment. The only exception was the caretaker, who periodically replaced the flowers. This created the extraordinary situation where one of Hollywood's most famous stars rests in a room that virtually no living person has seen since 1937. The peculiarity extends to the official marking of Harlow's resting place. Rather than bearing her professional name, Jean Harlow, by which the world knew her, the inscription reads Harleyan Carpenter, her birth name, followed by Our Baby, rather than any reference to her film achievements. This decision by her mother effectively separated the public persona from the private individual in death. Adding to the unusual nature of Harlow's burial is what happened to the private mausoleum after her mother's death. When Mama Jean passed away in 1958, she was initially entombed in the same chamber with her daughter. However, in an unexpected twist, Harlow's stepfather later had Mama Jean's remains moved to another location within Forest Lawn, leaving Harlow alone in the sealed room, despite the initial plan for them to remain together. Today, visitors to Forest Lawn can see only the exterior wall of Harlow's private room within the Great Mausoleum. The actual chamber remains sealed, creating one of Hollywood's most inaccessible memorials. Flowers are still periodically placed in the room, though now by cemetery staff rather than through the original trust fund, which eventually expired. The legacy of Harlow's unusual entombment has inspired numerous Hollywood legends, including persistent rumors that she was buried in a blue satin gown with a slip of paper bearing the name of her lover, William Powell. While these specific details remain unverifiable due to the sealed nature of her resting place, the extraordinary measures taken to separate Harlow from the world after her death continue fascinating film historians and fans alike. 8. Rudolph Valentino, The Borrowed Crypt. The silent screen's greatest lover rests in a burial arrangement so strange it became the subject of one of Hollywood's most enduring mysteries, involving a borrowed tomb, annual roses from an anonymous woman in black, and a decades-long quest for a permanent resting place that never materialized. Valentino's sudden death from peritonitis in August 1926 at age 31 triggered unprecedented public mourning, with an estimated 100,000 fans rioting outside the funeral home in New York. His remains were transported to Hollywood for burial, but his estate was insufficient to purchase an appropriate tomb due to financial mismanagement during his lifetime. What makes Valentino's burial truly unusual is that his final resting place was intended to be temporary. His friend June Mathis, a screenwriter who had discovered him, offered her family crypt at Hollywood Memorial Park Cemetery, now Hollywood Forever, as a temporary solution until his estate could afford a mausoleum befitting his status. This temporary arrangement became permanent when Mathis herself unexpectedly died the following year. In a macabre twist, when Mathis died in 1927, her family had Valentino's casket moved to a neighboring crypt to make room for her remains, creating the strange situation where Hollywood's greatest romantic icon ended up in what amounts to borrowed space, one crypt away from his intended location. The strangeness doesn't end there. Beginning on the first anniversary of Valentino's death in 1927, a veiled woman dressed entirely in black began appearing at his crypt, leaving a single red rose. This mysterious woman in black continued her annual pilgrimage for decades, becoming a Hollywood legend. Later investigation revealed multiple women had assumed this role over the years, some seeking publicity, others genuinely devoted to Valentino's memory. Perhaps most unusual was what happened to plans for Valentino's permanent memorial. His former manager established the Valentino Memorial Guild to raise funds for a massive monument. For over a decade, fans contributed to this fund, but the proposed grand mausoleum was never built. Financial records eventually revealed that most donations had been misappropriated, leaving Valentino permanently in his temporary resting place. Adding to the peculiarity is the contrast between Valentino's modest crypt and the elaborate annual ceremonies that continue taking place there. Each August 23rd, the anniversary of his death, Hollywood Forever Cemetery hosts a memorial service that has continued uninterrupted since 1927, making it the longest-running annual event in Hollywood history, despite the relatively modest nature of his actual grave. The unusual circumstances of Valentino's burial inspired numerous supernatural legends. For decades, visitors reported mysterious phenomena around his crypt, including unexplained cold spots, the scent of his signature cologne, and alleged apparition sightings. These reports transformed his burial site into a paranormal tourism destination alongside its historical significance. Today, visitors to Valentino's crypt at Hollywood Forever Cemetery find a modest bronze plaque marking his resting place, with the simple inscription, Rudolph Valentino, 1895 to 1926. The relatively understated marker gives little indication of either his tremendous fame or the extraordinary circumstances that led to his permanent residence in a borrowed tomb. 9. Jimmy Durante, the wife he couldn't join. The beloved comedian with the famously large nose ended his signature performances with the phrase, "Good night, Mrs. Calabash, wherever you are," a mysterious dedication that connected to his unusual burial arrangements and one of Hollywood's most touching posthumous love stories. Durante's death in January 1980 at age 86 came after a remarkable career spanning vaudeville, radio, film, and television. His burial arrangements reflected both his sentimental nature and the complex romantic history that defined his personal life. What makes Durante's burial truly unusual is that his grave at Holy Cross Cemetery in Culver City was purchased and planned decades before his death, not for himself, but for his first wife, Jean, who died of heart failure in 1943. After her passing, the devastated Durante bought adjacent plots, intending for them to be reunited after his own death. The strangeness emerges from what happened in the intervening decades. 16 years after Jean's death, the 67-year-old Durante married his second wife, Margie Little. Their marriage lasted until his death, but created a poignant dilemma regarding his final resting place. Should he be buried beside his first wife as planned, or with Margie, who had been his companion for his final 20 years? In a decision that reflected his sentimental loyalty, Durante chose to be buried as originally planned, beside Jean. This created the unusual situation where his grave marker bears the name of his first wife, while his second wife, who outlived him by many years, eventually was buried elsewhere, an arrangement that seemed to embody the melancholy undertone that balanced his comic performances. Perhaps most unusual is the connection between Durante's burial and his famous catchphrase, "Good night, Mrs. Calabash, wherever you are." For decades, Durante refused to explain this signature line that closed his performances. After his death, close friends revealed that Mrs. Calabash was his private nickname for Jean, derived from the California town of Calabasas, where they had once shared a special day together. The peculiarity extends to Durante's grave marker itself. Rather than highlighting his considerable fame, the stone bears a simple inscription with no reference to his career, just his name, dates, and the phrase, "the one and only." This understated memorial for one of entertainment's most recognizable personalities reflects his desire to be remembered first as Jean's husband rather than as a celebrity. Adding to the unusual nature of Durante's burial is what happened to his famous nose after his death. According to Hollywood legend, Durante had joked that his distinctive proboscis, which he called his schnozola and which had become his trademark, should be preserved separately. While this request wasn't actually fulfilled, the rumor became so widespread that cemetery staff reportedly fielded inquiries about the separate nose burial for years afterward. Today, visitors to Durante's grave at Holy Cross Cemetery find a modest marker that gives little indication of his significance to entertainment history. The simple stone bearing both his and Jean's names stands as a testament to a love that transcended both his fame and the passage of time, perhaps the most fitting memorial for a man whose comedic persona always contained notes of genuine emotion. 10. Mae West, the mausoleum she never visited. The sultry star, who famously invited fans to "come up and see me sometime," selected a final resting place she never actually visited during her lifetime, creating one of Hollywood's strangest burial arrangements and a posthumous situation that seems at odds with her forward-thinking personality. West's death in November 1980 at age 87 followed a career that had broken numerous boundaries regarding female sexuality and independence. Given her progressive attitudes during life, the extremely traditional nature of her burial arrangements surprised surprised many who knew her. What makes West's burial truly unusual is that she purchased crypts for herself and various family members in Brooklyn's Cypress Hills Abbey Mausoleum in the 1930s, despite having left New York permanently when she moved to Hollywood. This decision meant her remains would need to be transported approximately 2,800 miles from Los Angeles to Brooklyn after her death, returning her to a city she had essentially abandoned half a century earlier. The strangeness doesn't end there. According to those close to West, she never once visited the mausoleum after purchasing the crypts, despite returning to New York occasionally for performances. This created the peculiar situation where one of Hollywood's most controlling personalities selected a final resting place she herself never inspected or approved in person. Perhaps most unusual is the contrast between West's provocative public image and her extremely traditional burial location. Cypress Hills Abbey Mausoleum is a highly conventional, even austere facility, a stark departure from the flamboyant, boundary-pushing persona West cultivated throughout her career. Her simple bronze plaque bears only her name and dates, with no reference to her groundbreaking career or famous quips. The peculiarity extends to West's funeral arrangements. Despite her larger-than-life personality and famous love of diamonds and glamour, she requested a closed casket service with minimal ornamentation. This uncharacteristic modesty in death stood in sharp contrast to the extravagance she embraced in life, creating what many friends described as her final contradiction. Adding to the unusual nature of West's burial is what happened to her personal effects after her death. While most celebrities' possessions are either preserved by family or sold at auction, West's extensive collection of stage costumes, scripts, and personal memorabilia remained in storage for decades, essentially hidden from public view despite their historical significance. This posthumous privacy seemed to create a strange separation between her public legacy and her physical remains. Today, visitors to West's crypt at Cypress Hills find a modest marker that gives little indication of her significance to entertainment and cultural history. The simple plaque reads only Mae West, 1893 to 1980, creating a final resting place that seems remarkably understated for a woman whose career was defined by excess, provocation, and boundary-breaking independence. These extraordinary burial stories reveal a pattern worth noting. The final resting places of Hollywood's greatest stars often reflect tensions and contradictions that define their lives. For figures who crafted carefully controlled public images, death represented a final loss of control, with their remains sometimes ending up in locations that seem incongruous with their carefully cultivated personas. What's particularly striking is how many of these burial arrangements involve conflicting desires, studios wanting tourist-attracting memorial sites, while stars themselves often preferred privacy, families seeking to preserve private memories while fans demanded public access to their idols, and the tension between remembering these figures as the characters they portrayed versus the real people they were. The most remarkable aspect of these unusual burial stories is how they continue evolving long after the stars themselves have departed. Charlie Chaplin's body-snatching incident, the mysterious woman in black at Valentino's crypt, and the continuing pilgrimages to Marilyn Monroe's borrowed bench all demonstrate that these burial sites aren't static monuments but dynamic locations, where new chapters of these celebrities' stories continue unfolding decades after their deaths. What can we learn from the strange posthumous journeys of Hollywood's golden age icons? Perhaps it's that our fascination with celebrity doesn't end with death. In many ways, it intensifies, transforming burial sites into both pilgrimage destinations and canvases for continuing cultural myth-making. These graves and memorials have become more than markers of mortality. They're physical anchors for our collective cultural memory. These unusual burial arrangements also reveal something profound about the nature of stardom itself. In life, these performers often portrayed larger-than-life characters while simultaneously struggling to maintain private identities. In death, this duality often continues. Their physical remains might rest in modest, even obscure locations, while their cultural presence continues expanding through films, biographies, and the persistent public fascination with their lives and legacies. For modern visitors seeking these sometimes difficult-to-access resting places, the journey itself becomes meaningful. Unlike streaming a classic film with a click, finding Harlow's sealed crypt or McQueen's memorial requires effort and intention, perhaps creating a more meaningful connection to these figures than passive consumption of their work could provide. In a digital age where everything seems immediately accessible, these physical locations offer something increasingly rare: the need for genuine pilgrimage. And that concludes our exploration of Hollywood's strangest burial arrangements. Final plot twists for stars whose lives already contained enough drama for several lifetimes. From Chaplin's body-snatching incident to West's mausoleum she never visited, these posthumous journeys reveal new dimensions to personalities we thought we knew from their on-screen performances. What strikes me most about these stories is how they humanize figures who often seemed larger than life. Even Hollywood's greatest stars ultimately face the same human reality we all will, though perhaps with more unusual circumstances surrounding their final arrangements. These burial sites, whether elaborate or modest, accessible or hidden away, remind us that behind the characters we loved were real people with complex lives and relationships. If you found this journey through Hollywood's most unusual final resting places interesting, please hit that like button and consider subscribing for more content exploring the lesser-known aspects of classic cinema. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments, perhaps about which of these burial stories surprised you most, or which classic Hollywood graves you've visited yourself. Thank you for joining me on this exploration of where the stars of Hollywood's golden age truly ended up. Until next time, when we'll uncover more fascinating stories from when the silver screen truly sparkled, even if some of its brightest lights now rest in the most unexpected places.